20 months ago, you're like, ChatGPT is amazing. This is ridiculous. Like it could write my press releases and FAQs for me. Maybe it lies a little bit and hallucinates, but gets me 80% of the way there. And there wasn't really much open source stuff. This stuff is moving fast. So I think at KubeCon, you'll hear a lot more of like how people are embedding, this technology in a cloud native context.
Welcome to another edition of Cloud Unfiltered. I'm your host, Michael Chenetz, and today I have a great guest with Chris Anna. Say it again.
Aniszczyk. Let's do Aniszczyk or Aniszczyk if you're Polish or Slavic.
Yeah, I'm
talented
horrible with names. So I've tried spelling your name like 50 times throughout like the scheduling process for this.
Yeah. My apologies.
I have it and then I don't have it. So, so excited to have you here. I mean, you've done so much in your career. You're currently, in the Linux Foundation, CTO of Linux Foundation, and CNCF. And, just going down your history, like everything I was involved with in the early days that not in a project way, but I was interested in, I should say. You've been part of, which is amazing. So, starting out with like Gentoo, which if people don't understand what this is you basically dedicate, about 2 weeks of your time to Linux and then figure out how to optimize the crap out of Linux on your PC that can only be used once on your PC, because if you go to another PC, you're going to have to do the whole thing over again.
Yeah, pretty much. And you learn how all the little knobs work. I credit like my early career in really truly understanding Linux at a deep level and like and the benefits of an open source community, because the Gentoo Linux open source community was amazing, super, super helpful, but amazing distro still used in many places this world, like Chromium behind the scenes uses Gentoo. So I have a strong affinity to the project. I'm a little older now, so I don't have time to compile the world from scratch. And like, in my youth, I used to maintain like these crazy DistCC clusters. If you remember, like there was targets for like HPOC, Spark, so it was crazy times, but I learned a lot, and it really kind of helped me grow my affinity towards open source. I'm very, very fully appreciative to amazing Linux.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to those early days, I mean, I had a Ultra 5 and an Enterprise 2.
Yeah.
Unix and, so I remember those days. I ran actually one of my jobs right out of right when I was younger was I finished the Windows 2000 project. We were worried about, everything going crazy during 2000. So we were installing and patching and all that. And then they were like, we need a security guy. So I did ANS Interlock, which was, if you don't know what that is, it's like one of the first firewalls. There was that or Checkpoint, and somebody decided that was the better option.
Yep.
And
it is.
That ran on the Ultra Spark, and if you didn't license it every year or a few months, it would just stop working. So then you would get like this ticket, like everybody in the company's not working. So I remember those days.
It's unfortunate kids these days don't have the opportunity to work with like Spark and HPUX boxes. Those are fun, and I just have like very fond memories of like, hey, we're going to compile like Open Office from scratch or something. And it's going to take like a day, and you're like, well, maybe if I add to my DistCC cluster and add like these free HPUX boxes that I keep, getting from folks that don't want them anymore, maybe I'll take half a day.
Yep. I mean, that's when I came to Cisco 6 years ago now. One of the cool things about Cisco was that they had this program where you could get like the hardware that was in the labs afterwards. So I had a bunch of UPS hardware and like fabric interconnects. I still have it. I just don't run it because it cost me like an extra $1,000 to run this hardware in my house. But I have like 100 gig fabric and like fabric interconnects and all this kind of stuff. But the kids don't understand it these days because they just run it in Amazon or Google or
it's a little bit sad. Or maybe they have a little Raspberry Pi. That's kind of adorable.
I do have that now.
Yeah.
But to go back to where you came from, you were at IBM, you were the executive committee member of Java Community Process, the senior engineer manager at Twitter Open Source, co-founder of T Group, partner, and these are things you're still doing. This is what boggles my mind. Partner for Factory, executive director of OCI, vice president of developer relations of Linux Foundation, and CTO of Linux Foundation. How do you have time to do anything? I don't understand.
So the LF's a little bit interesting because it's a foundations of foundations, right? So my main job is mostly focused on the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which I helped start, but I also at the same time serve as executive director of the Open Container Initiative, which is like we standardize basically Docker and all the things around containers, right? And that in the early days, that was a crazy amount of work because it was no one wanted to really fully do that. It took a lot of kind of conflict to kind of get it to where it is today, where OCI images basically run the whole cloud native ecosystem. But that's a little more of a lightweight job. I just ensure that that thing kind of goes on. And DevRel is important to the Linux Foundation. I go and kind of always help. We have like 300 or so employees now at the Linux Foundation, probably
Wow.
1,000 plus projects, tons of these open source foundations. A lot of people don't realize it's like GraphQL Foundation, PyTorch Foundation, CNCF, Automotive Linux Foundation, Linux itself. It's like new Outer Curve Maps or it's not Outer Curve, Overture Maps Foundation. Like there's a lot of these things right there, and they all need help with like how to manage their development communities and so on. And a lot of the experience I've had previously in my career, and just like building up CNCF, which is the largest open source foundation within the Linux Foundation itself. Other people like to take those lessons. So I should probably update some of those job descriptions. But the other things are, I've been a huge, as a previous like open source founder. I started a company a long time ago focused on cloud-based managed development environments, focused on Eclipse. Back in the day, and worked with folks like Cisco and Google, and before people really cared about this problem where like we have thousands of engineers and they need to have like the same standardized development environment. Basically what GitHub Codespaces and Gitpod do today, I tried to do almost 15 years ago, and that experience like just taught me so much. And so after I found some success in life, I've always wanted to support entrepreneurs that are trying to build cool stuff with, on top of open source, because I view that as one way to like sustain open source technology. Is it's not the only solution, but entrepreneurship, helps, right? And so that's kind of just a personal passion. So I spend some time, usually my Fridays, half of my Fridays is focused on advising, companies and young founders generally on building open source focused businesses. And I have a strong affinity to the community in Austin, Texas, and I've been involved in the kind of venture scene here with Capital Factory, which exclusively focuses on Texas, companies. Bay Area doesn't need help on the venture investment side, in my opinion.
So explain a little bit, because I love origin stories, and honestly, one of the things that I focus on for Cloud Unfiltered is really, how things came about. Usually, I'm talking about a solution, and it's usually people are banging their heads against the wall so long that they've just said, I think I could do this better. So tell us how, like, Linux Foundation and CNCF and how you got involved and all of this in one word. No, I'm just kidding. No, but
so most of my career has been focused on like developer tools or low level like JVM internals, and I spent a lot of time in the Eclipse ecosystem. I served on the Eclipse Foundation board for 15 years, and eventually I ended up at Twitter. And I was hired there to basically help improve their open source practices. They were moving to the JVM away from Ruby. So they were basically becoming a Java Scala shop because they found that, hey, the Ruby VM sucks compared to all the great stuff that you could do on the JVM. And so that was kind of my original role. And through that, I actually got to learn a little bit about how companies truly build scalable infrastructure, right? Stuff that's kind of been hidden lock and key behind like the Google of the Googles of the world, the Facebooks of the world. Twitter had a lot of ex kind of Google employees, and so what we ended up doing is like, hey, we don't have a thing for Borg inside of Twitter. What can we do, right? Google has no interest in open sourcing it, and so eventually they found. Berkeley has something called AmpLab, which they kind of develop a lot of cool open source data infrastructure. Like Mesos was developed out of there originally, and Twitter decided to hire the Mesos team out of AmpLab and kind of cultivate the project. And the funny story about Mesos is it was originally focused on like, say you have a laptop that has like 16 cores. It was basically focused on like optimizing like one machine, like a lot of cores on one machine. And the idea was like, well, we could fix things up and make it work across like a huge data center. It won't be that much, work. And the smart engineers that worked on that project really made that thing. And so that exposed me to like, holy crap, like these folks behind the scenes, like Google, are like shit ton of like Linux boxes that are being orchestrated and like bin packed optimizing, workloads. There's a whole like the old school of like, here's a set of machines dedicated for databases for like Redis and Memcache and for like other things. Like that's not how they do it. Like they like containerize stuff, they bin pack things, and they run it efficiently to not waste data center space. And so that exposed me to this like, holy crap, there's a better way to actually build scalable software. And that was just kind of the orchestration bit. Then there's all this technology and like how our services are made and observed and so on. And so, I was there for about 5 years. Twitter was pretty successful. The company went public. It was a crazy time. Yeah, consumer tech is completely different than enterprise. I spent most of my career in enterprise tech. Holy, consumer tech is crazy. It's just like this. So like, it's like, oh, like, like Snoop Dogg comes in the office and you're just like, what the hell is this? Is like weird, bizarro, world. But fun experience, great technology, great engineers, and we open sourced a lot of this stuff at Twitter. We did Mesos, Parquet, Bootstrap, all these kind of technologies. So I left. And this was at the time, this was a little bit after like Google announced Kubernetes, probably 6 months or so, maybe before I left Twitter. And we kind of evaluated Kubernetes. We're like, too early stage, right? Mesos was a lot more advanced and actually used in production, both at Twitter and Apple privately. Like it had some serious bones, on it. But, Google eventually realized, well, we need to build an ecosystem here, right? And so there was a reason CNCF was not called like the Kubernetes Foundation, right? Because the original idea was like this stuff is going to be more applicable, hence the name, CNCF. And so they knew they were going to start a foundation. They announced it, I think, at OSCON, the Portland Open Source Conference at 2015. That like, hey, we're doing this. Come join us. And that was conveniently around the time that I was basically leaving Twitter. And so, I had some friends at the Linux Foundation. They kind of reached out. It's like, hey, do you want to help, run and start this thing, right? And I'm like, yeah, it kind of aligns in my interests. Like, I could try nonprofit life for a while. Why not? And also, can you also help us with this Docker container standardization effort, which more companies at the time really wanted because they didn't want to have another VMware situation where like, crap, we're going to be stuck with one vendor, that we have to just be forced to pay things. Where people wanted a more flexible format that could be used by multiple engines, multiple runtimes, and so on. So I helped start basically Open Container Initiative and Cloud Native Computing Foundation at the same time, which was like 2015. And OCI was a lot more busier in the beginning because of just like that. When OCI started, all the cloud providers were involved, like everyone, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, like the Cisco, like everyone wanted this, right? CNCF, when it started, it was like very, very small. It was like Google, IBM, Huawei, maybe Cisco. Like it was a very, very small group, but it didn't have all the hyperscalers yet because the Kubernetes project itself was trying to like, get to its 1.0 state. And so it's kind of funny where like we did all this work in OCI for a year, and then like all of a sudden CNCF started to kind of go a little bit crazy as things started to mature, and they attracted more folks. But like kudos to Google and some of the original folks. They really had a vision to build like a very like wide ecosystem that was multi-vendor, and not what happened with like Mesos and Docker, where it was too single vendor. You basically had you had Mesosphere, D2IQ at the time, and with Docker you had Docker, right? And so it was just hard to build a multi-vendor ecosystem that people could actually trust and depend on the technology. And so I think that was part of the secret sauce in the early days of CNCF. So that's kind of like the rough origin story. And there's Craig McLucky, there's a lot of Joe Beta, there's a lot of Sarah Novotny, a lot of great folks that kind of really helped in the beginning. I kind of just helped the foundation build and operate and kind of do crazy things like, hey, let's do our own event. Let's expand our technical scope to add more projects. That's not just Kubernetes, because orchestration is not enough. Like you need to observe your workloads, you need to secure your workloads, you need to ensure networking, is optimized and so on, and pluggable. So we don't make the mistakes that OpenStack did, where you were like stuck with Neutron and you had to have a pluggable.
I'd love to have it in between everything. What are you talking about? Come on.
I don't know if you have an OpenStack, but I adore. OpenStack actually paved the way for a lot of getting folks interested in open source infrastructure. But the challenge they had is they didn't really allow competing projects, right? In CNCF, we always like to give people options with like things like CNI, CSI, CRI. Like it's always kind of been that pluggable. The downside is it does sometimes lead to confusion because you have all this, pluggability, but that competitive dynamic improves things over the long term. It ensures that you're always kind of moving up and using the latest and greatest. Like, we did all the CNI work in CNCF, and like shit, now like the whole world's going to run on networking is going to run on eDPF at the end of the days, and like we already have that technology in there. If we were kind of stuck in like, hey, we could only use like flannel or some like older thing, like we would have just been in a like we would have been stuck with the latest, or sorry, the previous generation's technology, without being able to adapt. So that's kind of some of the secret sauce it seems that we allow competitive dynamics amongst our projects, which leads to a little bit of confusion, but leads to better engineering and technical outcomes that ensure that we're always the home of the latest and greatest open source infrastructure
Yeah, no,
technology.
absolutely. So, the downside of
But,
all this success is that
yeah,
it does add to some complexity. And one of the common
yep,
things that I hear, even from people on my show who come from all these, different solutions that are out there, is I think of, we grew up with this technology. As we're talking, we've tried Gentoo, we've grown up with it.
yep,
As things come out, we're like, you sound a lot like me, or I sound like you, vice
yep,
versa,
yep,
where
yeah,
where we're interested in the tech. So we're consuming
yep,
this tech as it comes out because we want to understand how it works.
yep,
But
absolutely.
think about the person whose CIO or CTO just
Mm,
said, hey, you know what? We have all these legacy applications. They're running on mainframes. We want to get them out of the
yep,
mainframe. And maybe they're going to be in a hybrid environment where you're
yep,
pulling the data, then you're going to Amazon and you want to create some kind of front end, and you're going to
yeah,
have to put all these clusters up. We want them containerized. So what people do is they're like, okay, well, I heard I have to do this thing containers. Kubernetes is the first thing that comes up when I Google it.
yeah,
But then, well, what do I need? Do I need, what network do I use with a
mm,
CNI?
yep,
What storage do I use with CSIs? How do I
yep,
glue it all together? How do I orchestrate it? How do I use it in test or dev? What other
yep,
kind of apps in the ecosystem do I need for security and all these other things? By the way, security is always the second thing. Usually you're just
yep,
getting the thing up there and you're like,
yeah,
yay, it's
yeah.
running.
Day
But
two, day two is security. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or
they're
day
not.
three.
It's not optimized. It's insecure. It doesn't have any of the flags you need. It
Yeah,
doesn't.
yeah.
So the question is really is how? What do you tell people when they're new to the game to say, hey, here's the best way to approach it? To me, and I've thought about doing this a few times, is like
Mm,
create like, here are your options. Like,
mm,
here's the most common stack.
mm,
And if you're looking at this, look at these 5 options. But here's the benefits and pros and cons. So I always tell people, and then I'm going to let you finish this question, but I always tell
mm.
people to think of the application first, which is a crazy idea, and I don't do it
Yep,
myself.
yep,
Don't build. Think of your needs for the application. Does it actually even
yeah.
need Kubernetes?
Mm,
Does it need
yep,
containerization? Does it need, what do you want to do?
mm,
Do you want it to be
yep,
scalable? Do you want it to be, what do you need to have it multi-zone? Do you need to have it,
yeah.
think about that and then back into the tools you need. But
Mm.
I'm curious about what your answer to people is. And I know that was really long, so sorry for everybody
No,
else.
no, no. This is good. I actually somewhat agree with you on the like application first mindset, where like I think at the end of the day you want to build something that provides value very quickly, so you kind of iterate and you don't have to like build something that is going to be crazy scalable. So that's for most businesses, unless you're like working at a large company that you're going to have millions of users, and you have to obviously you know plan a little bit differently. For most people, just get going, iterate, and then you could always kind of reshuffle your architecture long term. I think that's the pragmatic approach. But to your kind of question of like what to use, and people get confused, obviously we have that crazy cloud native landscape. If you go to landscape.cncf.io, it's just like boom, it's like I have 1,000 cards and like all these things to choose from. And in CNCF we don't prescribe one solution. We have this whole like no kingmakers philosophy, right, where
Yeah,
there's like a bunch of different service meshes, there's a bunch of different storage projects, bunch of different security projects, and they all have pros and cons. And the way to kind of think about it is we generally don't prescribe a stack, right? Like our home is like we're a home of open source projects that our members, our member ecosystems, folks like Cisco, the Googles of the world, they turn those into products. And hopefully those products produce amazing profits that hopefully you reinvest back into the projects and the foundations. We have this products profits life cycle that we kind of want to always have in our ecosystem. But it's really no difference than like Linux, right? Like most companies, they're not going to go build Linux from source, right? And kind of have a thing that is fully secured and good to go, right? Like you're not going to have all the upteen Linux security features that you have to make sure is configured to have a very proper lockdown distro. People just just don't do that from day one. That is not the role of the Linux project itself. that, there's generally like a separate, effort to, there's like all the SecComp crap, and there's all this stuff that is done and usually that's done by the member companies in our ecosystem that have products that like have to get FedRAMP certified. Like there's a whole other thing. Like our goal in the foundation is to provide people a lot of Legos that hopefully, you could go play with the Legos yourself. Like the great thing was like you could be a engineer inside of Disney or whatever company and be able to play with the stuff fairly easy and like test it and see how it works. But most people down the line are going to go get like a product or buy a solution at the end of the day. Not everyone, but they'll do a lot on their own. But eventually, we do have a healthy commercial ecosystem. Like we have this program called Kubernetes certified service providers. I think there's like 100 plus of them all over the world that like you literally could go pay to help you on this journey. If you're a company in Japan or a company in Finland, wherever, somewhere in Europe, there's usually an organization out there that can help. Even Cisco, I think, is the case. It's like there's people out there that will do there, and that's the thing that sometimes people come to us like, I just want to download, I want to download DevOps and Kubernetes, and I want to download DevOps, and like, can we get this on CNCF and just have it all work? I'm like, that's kind of not how it works. We're literally a provider of Legos, and projects, not products. There's a difference between a project and a product, and that's something I always have to kind of, tell folks that that's not the role of our organization. But we have an amazing, member ecosystem, including folks like yourself that really try to kind of build cool, products, with these things. So it's like Cilium, right? Like all y'all bought a company recently called Isovalent.
A little bit.
Yeah, exactly, right. And like a lot of people will use Cilium by default, but there are products out there, from multiple companies that make it kind of easier and more integrated and so on. So that's the thing that I try to get across from people, even though it's very hard because people do really try to download DevOps. They're like, oh, okay, I just want to download DevOps, install it, and have it all good to go.
But to your credit, I mean, there is, all these projects are well structured, and by the way, we're all friends with a lot of people on the different tag organizations and things like that. This is not an easy process in any way, either as a process or politics or any of those things. I mean, everybody has different ideas. All the ideas are great.
Yeah.
But getting them well documented and having this process for every single project, I mean, it is a huge task. So
thank you. And we were a little bit crazy in CNCF where we kind of have this, we call it minimal viable governance, where each of our projects kind of like govern themselves a little bit differently. It has to be open and transparent and fair, but like Kubernetes is structured differently than how Cilium is, than how the CNI project. And because, at the end of the day, it's, there's like this, I think it's called like the IKEA principle, where it's like, if you buy something from IKEA and you go build your own, whatever desk, right? You're usually pretty freaking stoked about it. You're like, yes, I built it on my own. And that's kind of, you can think about that about like open source project governance. Like if you kind of guide folks and they kind of build it on their own, they're going to build it in a way that optimizes for their needs versus like here's the only way to do things. Like here's the Apache way, or here is whatever the Eclipse way. Like the CNCF way is like, there is no way. You kind of build it on your own with like templates and guidance and optimal for your project. Like Kubernetes needs a steering committee and like, this crazy SIG structure, like there's a lot of things going on and they need that. CNI, no, very flat and a little bit more simple. So like that's kind of one of our like insights of, at least for me, open source. Like you just can't have one way to do things. Like it just doesn't work because every project has its own kind of unique
by the way, for full transparency, I never follow the IKEA directions. I'm always like, I know forget about
you're just gonna do, you're like, I don't need a template. I'm just gonna go screw the instructions.
I don't know if you have kids, but I have a 7-year-old.
Okay.
And he watches Bluey, and there's this Bluey episode where he's like following the he's like, I'm not following some stupid dog telling me how to build this. And
by the way, it happens also in CNCF sometimes. We're like, hey folks, we literally have templates for this, and we pointed them to you. Why did you not look at them?
Absolutely. So
that's hilarious.
So cool. I mean, I think that's a great way to be. And it really thinks, I do think at some point I love to give back. And one of the things that I'm thinking about is, like you, I've been through many different careers as a network engineer, as a security engineer, as a developer, as a, all these different things. And there's a lot of people that don't have that experience these days. So if I can just guide them a little bit or give them a little bit of information, then I think it's great. So I think one of the things I do want to do is
Yep.
help along that cloud native journey. So I've been thinking about that a lot lately.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think there is some way to do it. Maybe it's not related to the CNCF, but it
Yep.
can. I think that there needs to be some more guidance around like what's actually needed.
Yeah, especially like, I do have an affinity for, like, I have a lot of friends that were, call it like, the network engineers trained in that, like, the whole big spice, if you remember the Spiceworks community and like
Yep.
that type of, world, and, them finding a pathway to, cloud native I don't think I mean, it's a little bit difficult, but they are generally like, they generally know a little bit of Linux. Like, as long as you know a little bit of Linux, you have a head start on a lot of folks. Like, I think it's impossible to really grasp our technology stack. Like, I have people that try to learn Kubernetes first without even understanding like Linux fundamentals. I'm like, that's going to
It's
be
crazy.
like, you've just entered hard nightmare mode and like Doom parlance. Like, it's just not. It's going to be very difficult for you. So please learn Linux, first, and
Yeah.
then the basics, and then kind of go from there. And we actually we created a new certification last year in training around this, called the Kubernetes and Cloud Native Associate. It was meant for people that are like brand new to the ecosystem, because, like,
That's awesome.
the landscape's an eyesore. There's a lot of terminology. You hear like CNI, CRI, like, a service, like it becomes difficult. So it just really starts with the fundamental, basics, and we kind of have that available now. And if you kind of look at a lot of the new stuff that we're doing around training and certification, CNCF, a lot of them are associate level things, because some of us, like, you and I have been around the space for all, we have that like history and knowledge, where others may not, right? And so we're really focusing on kind of, associate level stuff, making it a little bit easier for folks to get started,
That's
versus like,
awesome.
here's the landscape, go wild, go figure out how to, work with Kubernetes, and you're going to use Cilium, and like people just don't understand
Yep.
like basic Linux networking. It's impossible. So we're working really hard. It's one of my primary goals, and the CNCF organization goals for the next 2 years, to really focus on those kind of beginner, associate, student, or folks that are like transitioning from, let's call it, network engineering, or even database, DBA style stuff, into,
Sure.
what happens
Yeah,
in a
no,
cloud native
absolutely. It's
context.
funny you say that because, and I'll probably get in trouble for this, but I my whole time at Cisco has been focusing on cloud native. I was in the cloud
Mhm.
native CTO office doing all that kind of stuff,
Yep.
and doing and focusing on cloud native. And I was kind of, that wasn't the rest of Cisco when I
Mhm.
started. Now it's had a
Yep.
shift, but I still get a lot of people that ask me, well, how did you transition into this cloud native ecosystem
Yeah.
and to understand this stuff, or how do I do that? So, it's definitely a common thing. And the more help that people can get is amazing.
Yeah, and one thing we've also done is, like, if you've been to KubeCon before, right? Like, it's a
Yeah,
sprawling
never heard of it.
conference now, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, 10,000 plus people. We're about to get,
yeah,
in March in Paris this year, we're
yep,
on track to sell out at 13,000. We now have like 101 tracks. So, like, if you're truly brand new, the 101 track is there for you. Like, you will get the basics there, and like, you're not going to go join and like someone's going to like deep dive on like, how GPU support is evolving in Kubernetes with this new DRA, cap or something. Like, there's now a very much more friendly track and option for folks at KubeCon.
So that's a great segue. So I'm going to be at KubeCon doing Cloud Unfiltered. You'll be there, obviously,
Yep.
probably as a
Yep.
madman, doing
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Make me.
yeah. So what do you expect to see this year? So it's funny, every year at the end of Cloud Unfiltered, I try and put what I thought the trend was of that particular KubeCon. Like one year, it was absolutely eBPF. I shouldn't say one year,
Yep.
one
Yep.
KubeCon.
Mhm.
Next one was WASM. Everything was
Mhm.
WASM. People were just
Yep.
talking about WASM left and right. I
Yep.
think the last KubeCon I would say is a mix between AI,
Mhm. Mhm.
because obviously
Mhm.
ChatGPT kind of moved the world, and LLMs and
Yep.
that kind of
Yep.
stuff, and
Yep.
security, because people are like, well, now we're getting this stuff running.
Mhm.
What are we, how do we secure these things in the cloud native
Mhm.
world with supply chain security, with all the things that you have to worry about? So what do you expect is going to be. And we'll test your predictions at the end of.
Yeah. I may have some insider knowledge here also, but based on some of the surprise keynotes. But let's just say, so KubeCon in Europe is in Paris. If
Yep.
you're very
I look
familiar with
forward to it.
Paris, it is the basically one of the hotbeds of truly open source AI technology, right? You have companies like Mistral out there and Throb. Like, there's a lot of like there, and so that you're definitely going to see kind of an AI, but more of like maybe an open source AI theme, not just like AI generic, but more of that kind of open angle. Because like if you I'm trying to remember, it was what was it, 8 months ago, 7 months ago? Do you remember there was this there's like this Google memo like, we have no moat on AI, right? Like it's like the like open source will eventually like eat away at AI, right? Like you're like, it's just gonna be open models, open everything, right? And that was about 8 months ago. And 8 months ago, you're like, ChatGPT is amazing. This is ridiculous. Like it could write my press releases and
Yep.
FAQs for me. Maybe it lies a little bit and hallucinates, but gets me 80% of the way there. And
Yep.
there wasn't really much open source stuff. 8 months later, like holy crap, like the latest Mr. release that I think happened this week is like basically on par with ChatGPT 3.5. Like, this stuff is moving fast. So I think at
Really.
KubeCon you'll hear a lot more of like how people are embedding this technology in a cloud native context. Not only just like, hey, obviously things like OpenAI and all that, like they're using CNCF projects behind the scenes to run this stuff. Like it is the underpinning of running AI workloads. But I think you're going to see a lot more open source AI things. We now have some new sandbox projects or projects in CNCF that have an AI focus, like HGPT, and others that are coming in. I even saw another interesting theme here is like, I don't know how much you've tried to play with trying to run LLMs locally and
Mhm.
build things. And like, this stuff is like, I look at this like, holy crap. Like, look, yeah, cloud native developer experience, not always like the best thing in the world. Sometimes it can be rough around the edges, but like, it's pretty good. Like, we're at a place where we could literally like observe a service all the way down to like a database call to maybe even like a Linux kernel syscall, and have that almost all trace. We have this notion of like service meshes, which allow for like canary rollouts, A/B testing, like all the security stuff that we have. Things like SigStore allow for a testing, and like, we've done a lot. Our developer
Mhm.
experience has improved a lot. Whole AI space is like crazy. I'm like, what are these people doing? So I think what you're going to see is a lot of the ideas that we've kind of like painfully tried to, that we got to in CNCF on just making cloud native more usable and better developer experience, is going to percolate in the AI community. And I'll give you like a bit of an example here. I came across a project recently called it had a funny name, like in CNCF we have a project called Open Telemetry, right, which is trying to
Mhm.
standardize how we do
We were
observability
very.
of.
I think we were involved in that actually.
Yeah, no, very, very, very,
Yeah.
very, very involved
Yeah.
in that, and now it's our second most successful project in terms of contributions and community size behind Kubernetes. Crazy, 2 years, time frame in terms of how fast that had to go. But there was a project came across called, it was Open LLMetry, to stuff that little LLM term in there, and these folks basically kind of forked Open Telemetry a little bit to like add some features to make it work for essentially LLM models, to basically observe them from, creation to running, and, all the whole, AI workflow, step. So I think what you'll see is people doing more of that, like,
Yeah.
taking the best ideas from our lessons and trying to apply them in the AI space, and vice versa. Like, even Kubernetes is, doing a lot of work to support, AI workloads in a better way. So like, there's going to be that like natural information sharing that happens in open source community. So I definitely look that for a theme. The security for sure is still a massive theme. As you're aware, there's a lot of like regulation, that's
Mhm.
happened. Governments are starting to regulate open source software. A little bit. The U.S. has passed the Secure Open Source Act. The EU is going through the Cyber Resiliency Act, or the CRA, that they're kind of going through. All these things are basically mandating like, you need to have a software bill of materials. You then potentially need zero trust. Like, security is paramount. And like, unfortunately or fortunately, like, most products these days are 80, 90% open source software. And so a lot of these things are going to have to kind of flow back to the projects, and we're gonna have to come up with better solutions to kind of meet these regulatory needs. So security is going to be a big topic, and you can kind of tell where we only have two hubs. We call them hubs at KubeCon. We have an AI hub and a security hub, and those are kind of like the big little little things. I think those would be probably the two overarching things, like open source AI and lessons from cloud native and how to make the AI developer experience a lot better, not for just like the AI infrastructure person, but for like the equivalent what would be an application developer in the AI space, which I think they like someone who used the term AI engineer, which I thought was kind of cute. So
Yeah, I mean, just today or yesterday, AWS just announced their solution for
yep.
running LLMs locally. I mean, I don't know if it's open source or not, but obviously,
It
NVIDIA's
is. It is. It is because I
no,
called
hold
Darren.
on, but
Oh,
NVIDIA's RTX on
okay.
running that. I don't know if that one's open source.
Unclear.
Yeah, I
Probably,
don't know. I don't know.
Probably not. So,
Probably not, but it's interesting to see this space morph, and now you're starting to see these local based implementations
yeah,
of LLMs
yeah,
and having this
yeah,
chat based interface and all that kind of stuff.
yeah.
So I think it's going to be evolve. I had Alex Jones on when he first came out
Yep.
with his chat
KGPT. Yeah, yep,
Kubernetes
yep,
GPT. Just had David Aronchik on yesterday
yep,
talking
yep.
about
Bakalo. Yeah.
Cisco
He's
and all
working on
that
some
kind of stuff.
really
Yeah.
cool stuff. I'm a huge fan of what he's
Now
doing.
he's
So
doing COD stuff, which is really interesting. Which I think the interesting part is now
yeah,
running. I think one of the interesting things for me
yep,
is now running these things like in Wasm. So you
yep,
could actually run containers and
yep,
run things
yep.
right in the browser. Which is
Yep.
insane to me. It's kind of come full circle.
It,
But
it is crazy. Like I will say the intersection of AI and WebAssembly and cloud native is going to be fascinating because I think at the end Kubernetes is going to be evolved to orchestrate this stuff, right? Like at the end of the day, like I think the project itself will evolve to make these workloads work well. Like no one wants to write a brand new orchestrator. It's just going to evolve. It's just like no one's going to rewrite Linux. Linux has evolved to like run in fuck cars, space, little tiny devices. Like Kubernetes will go through the same evolution. In my opinion, but on the WASM thing is there's companies these days that are literally, if you try to like run these models locally, a lot of times you have to drag in like Python and a million dependencies in the world, right? A lot of people are going to like, wait a minute, maybe we could kind of compile these things as a WASM binary, right? And it's a lot simpler and smaller. So I think you're going to see a lot of like ideas percolate across AI, cloud native, WASM to lead to just better solutions and developer experience for all these ecosystems.
I totally agree with that. I think that I'm super intrigued to see how this is all coming together.
Mm-hmm.
Some people when Wasm first came out, they're like, oh, this is going to be a competitor to like using
Mm-hmm.
containers and Kubernetes and things like that. To me, I see more of an integration and of choice of how you want to use this, and it comes back to that.
Mm-hmm.
What's important for your application? What are your needs?
Yep.
I think
Yep.
not enough people think about that. Just like me and probably you, I
Yep.
love the tech, so I'm looking at how can I use this tech because it's interesting. But that's not really the
Yep.
way you should do it. It should be like,
Yep.
okay, well, what are the needs that are
Yep.
basing your choice for this tech?
Exactly, and how quickly can I deliver to whatever my customer or end user of said software is, and kind of get that value fast, so you could actually start iterating and improving versus kind of messing with the latest technology. It's like containers never fully displaced virtual machines. WebAssembly is not going to fully displace containers. These are all like kind of better together and better for whatever use case you need. You pick what's best, right? WASM is probably going to do extremely well on edge based deployments, right? It's like a perfect little environment for that. Maybe people will run models on kind of WASM infrastructure because it's a little bit easier than dragging your world of million Python dependencies and so on for a lot of this
Yeah.
technology. So I think it's a pragmatic way to look at it. Like technology is never fully displaced, right? And the beauty about things like CNCF, we have all these communities working together, in the open. And I remember earlier you mentioned we were kind of talking about, oh, like why does this kind of working in some way? Why does it work? Is like I kind of view like CNCF projects and open source projects like the modern equivalent of like what would be an open customer advisory board. Like you've been around, like, cabs, right? Like they've been
Yep.
around forever, right?
Yeah.
They've technically been very close, but like now if you kind of look at it, like if you're, a large bank or, a large retailer, like, hell yeah, I could do all this stuff in the open now. Like, I can raise my needs in the open. Like it's basically taking that purpose of like, an open source project is like a cab for everyone is kind of a weird way to look at it. I knew you would understand it. Not everyone
Yep.
understands that if they haven't worked in enterprise land.
Yeah, so for my listeners and people not looking at us or
Yeah,
not understanding
yeah,
what that is, so basically you have these advisory committees that kind of help you, like you talk about the products, you talk about the solutions and what they're going through, and then
yeah,
you get feedback on these things, and it's great.
yeah.
But really, that's how and that's how open source works too, and that's why open source works so well,
Mhm,
is that you instantly have this group of people that are passionate about getting this product or
mhm,
I think say product, really
yeah.
solution,
Mhm,
the way the best that it possibly can be, and so you're
mhm.
getting that feedback loop immediately, which is amazing.
Yeah, and it's transparent, so which
Yep.
holds people accountable a little bit better versus like, getting a nice little wine and dine customer advisory board, dinner by whatever company you're working with, and they'll follow up after that. But it's kind of how I viewed it. It's like everything's transparent, accountable, and everyone's invited type of thing. Maybe they're not as nice as your corporate enterprise customer advisory board dinner because everything's on GitHub basically, but
Yep.
it's still good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So what? The last question I think I have for you is what are you looking forward to? And it's KubeCon Paris. I mean, I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
just be back in Paris. I think great location. You know.
Paris is an amazing city. Have a huge affinity toward it. Like I said, I think we're going to be the largest open source conference in Europe with 13,000 selling out. So if folks haven't registered, I highly recommend that they register in the next few weeks because things are going to get tight, and we'll probably have to have a wait list just like we had to do with Amsterdam last year. But there's other like this year, like this is the first year, by the way, we're going to do KubeCon in India. So I
Yeah.
am like super stoked, about that, happening in December later this year, where we have an amazing community. If you look at the countries of like top contributing countries to
Yeah.
CNCF projects, you have the U.S., China, India, and then I believe Germany. After that, like huge, massive, community out there, and we're going to bring KubeCon to there later this year. So I'm very, very stoked about that because we are a global,
Yeah.
ecosystem. Our contributors come, I think 230,000 something contributors now come from all over the world.
I'd love to go to India. I'll have to figure out how I get Cloud Unfiltered to India.
Hey, we could talk about that. Like we're like I don't want like we're not we're definitely like have booked the place and like but are in early planning stages. But like with KubeCon Paris being so soon, like I think a lot of people don't realize the CNCF staff were only about, let's say, 40 people,
Yep.
and we run some crazy events. So it's a lot of work for what is perceived as a huge organization. Like we're more like a startup
It's
than
amazing.
anything
It's
else.
it's incredible. And honestly, everybody that I've worked with is so nice and so easy to get along with and so accommodating. I love it's my favorite organization to deal with.
Well,
By the way,
thank you.
yeah, by the way, for people that haven't and are listening to the show and haven't been there, I just want to mention that it's not only the tracks. I mean, people talk about the hallway track.
Mhm.
This
Yep.
is where things get created and done. And
Yep.
honestly, I work for emerging tech at
Mhm.
called Outshift at Cisco.
Yep.
One of the reasons I go and I'm so excited to go is because I am interested in what the new tech is and what people are talking about, what you're not hearing about,
Mhm.
and the connections you make and the interesting people you're talking to for
Yep.
ideas. So, people think of a conference as just, hey, we're going to go listen to tracks, but really it's the people that make a huge difference
Yep.
in the, in KubeCon.
I'm happy to hear that because that's generally one of the things we really try hard to do. And I talk to a lot of folks that work at like large banks or retail company, and like they like to send folks to like KubeCon and then generally whatever their preferred cloud provider whatever is event, and they like KubeCon because like here's where usually like the latest bleeding edge stuff is happening, and it's multi-vendor, multi-cloud, on-prem, cloud, like it covers the gamut, so they're able to kind of soak in a bunch. And if your organization out there is like really looking to see what's the latest and greatest and see solutions that like we live in a multi-cloud, multi-vendor world. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is, and we're literally probably the best place in the world that focuses on that particular with an open source twist, of course.
Yeah, so great. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you? What do you want to leave people with?
Yeah, yeah. What do I leave people with? I'm easily found on unique last name, but if you're on the Twitter / X, I used to work there, so I got a sweet little handle, CRA. You can easily find me there, or CRA@linuxfoundation.org if you want to shoot me a note. That's generally my preferred contact, but I hope to see some folks in the flesh at KubeCon Europe in Paris this year. But yeah, I'm pretty easily findable online, and hope really folks could take an opportunity to kind of join us physically, because it's like, if you're looking to like start your career or up level your career, like attending the event is one of the best ways to do it, because people are so nice and helpful. Like everyone that works in the community wants to pay it forward. Like we have so many stories of folks that were like first time contributor to maintainer to now is like a technical board member, or like has started a company. Like people love to kind of give back and pay it forward, and a lot of that happens at KubeCon and our events all over the world.
Well, thank you so much again for coming on. I totally agree with all those sentiments, and it's the reason why I'm involved.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, absolutely, and I look forward to seeing you there. So thanks for coming on the show.
No worries. Look forward to catching up in Paris. Thank you for inviting me.